Welcome to the CROC Podcast.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here is your host, Dr. E.
Howdy, CROC Nation. Dr. Tommy Eanelli here with you with another CROC Podcast. On the other side of the computer glass, my bestie, my partner in crime, the valet of the CROC Podcast, Mr. Angel Santana. Have faith, let it begin. Angel, God bless you. How are you, buddy?
Very good. As we record this, the weather has really taken us back to the good old days of spring. And as they say, spring is in the air, and two of my friends saw robins. I think that's a good sign.
I have to tell you, the weather is starting to change, but remember, everybody, March is still winter in the Hudson Valley. Expect at least one or two more bad days out there, but he is right. It is beautiful. And Angel, I want to just take a moment to say this. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, but on behalf of the board of directors and the entire Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer organization and podcast, we wish you a belated but beautiful birthday. Tell us about how you spent your 25th birthday.
Yeah. So no, it was good. It was a good time. Like I think when you get to a certain age, it's really more about just spending time with family. So for me, it was great. Turning 47 is a nice little small milestone. I'm waiting for the 50. I'm excited for 50, even though it's 3 years away. But other than that, it was a good time. Food, my friend, good food.
Yep. Did mom make you some rice and beans?
No, I cooked. I made arroz, rice with steak, Spanish style.
Wow.
I have to make you some.
Angel, we wish you the happiest birthday month, and let's get to it. So this is the third and final part of our little mini series about survivor thriver side effects from their cancer treatments. And we began with the 8% rule and described how patients will invariably, even if everything is done perfectly, 8% of them, or 8 out of 100, will have some sort of side effect from their surgery or their radiation or their chemotherapy. Of the 8%, 8%, most of them will go away most of those side effects will disappear. In half of them, or 4%, the side effects linger. And in 2%, the side effects can be lifelong and perhaps be even very severe. So we kind of spent a episode on that. And then we looked at patient side effects from this perspective of the patient. So we had those two wonderful patients we described who got wonderful care and they became cancer-free, but they're suffering from severe side effects, and gave the perspective from their side. And today we're going to end the series and further the discussion in a very unique way, and in a way which I think hasn't really been done. And that's by looking at side effects, survivor thriver side effects, from the perspective of the provider, from the perspective of the doctors. So a couple of caveats, which is my fancy word of saying warnings or rules before we start the podcast. We are not talking about physician malpractice here. We're just talking about side effects from treatment that are expected or could happen even if everything is done correctly. Number two is that I'm not trying to conjure sympathy and elevate the physician above the patient at all. Just wanted to give everyone a different perspective of the physician-patient relationship, the survivor thriver / care team relationship as it relates. We always talk about the relationship and center it around a survivor thriver's cure, but not around the survivor thriver side effects. So we're going to do that tonight. And I believe that is somewhat unique. And I'm going to start with a story. Angel, I always like to start with stories.
Love stories.
And we're going to talk tonight, about Cynthia. And Cynthia is a young lady who came to me last week. Very sweet girl with breast cancer. And she's a city girl who came up to Orange County not too long ago. Her husband's a retired policeman. And very fine, salt to the earth, great people. And she figured, since she lived in the city for so long, she had access to a very high level, I call tertiary care hospital, which means like one of those specialty cancer only hospitals that specialized in breast cancer. And she had some of the best heavy hitters, researchers, and people who write the papers about breast cancer taking care of her. And she went into surgery in this world-class breast cancer center. And when she woke up from surgery, she could not move her left arm. In addition, she had a Mediport in her neck, which she didn't know about. And imagine waking up after having, a lumpectomy or a surgical procedure and end up with this dead arm and with a device in you that you didn't know was going to be there. So Cynthia is going to be front and center in our discussion about the provider side of side effects from a different view, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to throw a couple of phrases at you to kind of, again, doing our due diligence and our research here on the CROC Podcast.
All right.
The physician's situation or process or position in a survivor thriver's side effect can be viewed by a specialized term called vicarious traumatization. So that's a really fancy word, right? So don't say that you guys don't learn anything on the CROC Podcast. So that simply means that a person is traumatized by the trauma of others, which makes sense. It's not just in cancer or it's in everything. So you could also get the development of secondary post-traumatic stress syndrome, and you could also suffer what we all know as survivor's guilt. So the provider, unbeknownst to him, as he's going through medical school or she's going through medical school, they don't teach you this stuff. But this is all part and parcel of that comes along with the degree, is all of these feelings and all of these situations that you're really not able to cope with because you really haven't been through it or haven't been trained on how to. So that's what we're going to try to do tonight. I'm going to read from a couple of excerpts from different doctors that are anonymous, but we'll start with this one. The name of the doctor, his name is Scott. I remember feeling horribly sad that I couldn't do more for this child. This hit me harder than most of them. The child was the age of my oldest daughter, and I guess that I felt that this could have been my family. They were a nice family and didn't deserve to have this outcome. I cried a lot over this case, and I guess I still cry when I think about her. So it's very important for everyone out there, even our survivor thrivers who are the ones suffering, that many others are affected by your pain. And I also want to do a secondary theme on this podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit about separation and the need for separation, if there is a need for separation between the physician and their patient. So the quote that I'm going to say is something we're going to bring up at the end of the podcast. Do physicians need to establish separation from the patient to maintain our ability to be effective? So, Angel, the way I'm going to run this podcast is that we're going to talk about a couple of things about the provider's, situation and experience with patient side effects. Then we're going to bring it around back to Cynthia, and then we're going to bring it back and end with whether a physician should establish that separation or not. So we're going to go to quote number 2, Angel. This is from a physician called Charles. Physicians are in a double bind of expectation to be human, just like their patients, and to be superhuman, not like them at all, in never being able to make a mistake and having to know everything. And I know I said that we're not talking about making mistakes here, but I just wanted to say that there is the expectation of the physician to be superhuman, which I think sort of revs the motor or primes the motor of this feeling of, having to deal with the side effects from our hands, from the hands of us as your surgeons, your oncologists, your radiation oncologists. These side effects come from us, even if they're not done in a way that is wrong, it's still coming directly from us. So we're going to go to quote number 3, and we're going to talk about a concept called second victim. So if you think about that, that actually makes a lot of sense. So the first victim, of course, is a survivor thriver, and the second victim is the caretaker, is the caregiver, I'm sorry, the physician, the healthcare team. So recognition that healthcare providers who face patient outcomes, even if these outcomes are expected or acknowledged, are also victimized by the event. The darkest hour of one's professional career, and may become a life and career altering event. So it's a big deal when a physician has to come to grips with what they do to patients on occasion. And how this affects us, Angel, the providers changes our process, and it's different at different points in our career. So in training, I remember there was a case, it was quite interesting. I'll actually give you my personal perspective in a second. So you have the physician in training, you have the physician in early career, you have the physician in mid-career, and then you have the physician in late career. So how this affects us, being responsible for these side effects actually changes in our, in where we are in our careers. So I remember there was an incident when I was a resident, when we were called to a code, and I actually didn't even intubate the patient. I was the intern. So after the patient was intubated, they screamed at me as the intern, "You need to write a note about the intubation." So I said, anesthesia team or critical care team dispatched to the code, and a number 8 endotracheal tube was placed, right? And then I had to sign my name. So what I didn't know is a couple of months later, I got served with a summons that I'm being sued. And it was actually quite funny as I look I look back in it, because I didn't even touch the patient, and all I did was write a note, and I was sued. So obviously I was discharged from the suit. But Angel, I spent many a night, being, not being able to sleep because of that. And I look at that as being so silly, because, here I am, the patient, nothing to do with us. But of course, the patient had an unexpected outcome. And of course, I was very affected. But then early in my career, when I did start having to deal with side effects that were from my hand, something very bland, or something that was really not a big deal and was just going to go away, very quickly. I remember myself being on vacation, being on an island, scuba diving, and being overwhelmed with like this feeling. I can't tell you about this feeling. Just was a terrible feeling about hurting somebody. And then as I got to my mid-career, my feelings started to, to dissipate, and, I became appropriately sad, but not overcome with this sadness. And then, of course, now in my late career, we talked about the 2 patients in the second podcast, of course, that had severe side effects from their treatments. And yet I can't tell you I feel good about it. I'm very sad for them, but I'm able to take it in perspective. So as we progress through our careers, we will adapt, and we will absorb, this feeling of guilt and severe self-doubt, which we're going to talk to you about in a second. So as I said, practitioners don't begin their career like a light switch, right? So we don't just, are in the off position, and then we go to graduation and get our diplomas, and then the switch gets turned on and we become doctors, and we're expected to everything that comes along with that. We bring to the table all of our experiences, all of our traumas, all of our neuroses, our upbringings, which are generally problematic. And of course, all the transference that we've talked about on this podcast, of how, things that have happened to us can reverberate depending on different circumstances that are presented to us. So let's talk, Angel, about some of those feelings associated with these side effects that we produce in our survivor thrivers. So there is some denial. Sometimes we obsess. There's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of loss of confidence. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of depression. There's a lot of despair. There's a lot of loss of connectivity. And there's almost like, I like to think of the famous Pink Floyd album, The Wall, we almost create a wall around us. There's this callus that develops, that could develop to make us uncaring and unfeeling. And sometimes we have to deal with what we call the grapevine gossip, of our colleagues or the nurses talking behind our backs saying, hey, did you see what this guy did to this patient? Oh my God, it was terrible, et cetera, et cetera. And we worry about these opinions from our peers. So I'm going to do quote number 4, Angel, back to a resident named Scott. I started to doubt myself. There were some things that I thought maybe if I had done it this way or done it a different way, it wouldn't have happened or could have been avoided. I lost my confidence for some time. So there's a lot of this that goes on with the providers, with the physicians during this very terrible and difficult time. And to then go to quote number 5 from Charles, the unspoken imperative of medicine is that regardless of what happens, physicians should be able to handle it. So again, there's also that expectation that we should, if we're doctors, we need to be able to be superhuman, again, going back to that. So to quickly go through the stages of repair, how physicians can repair themselves during this process. The first step, of course, is recognition. And that's a recognition that side effects will happen even if you do everything perfectly. Number 2, there are some side effects that you may not expect, but again, they're not because of your fault. They're not to any fault of yours. And of course, there's the actual errors, which we'll talk about in a different podcast series. Number 2, the development of maturity. It's part of the job, Angel. We are not Ben Casey. We have to get used to the fact that side effects will happen, and we have to accept this. Number 3 is communication. Good communication beforehand, and we've talked about it before, a good informed consent, a good discussion with the patient that's honest, but caring, again, guarded optimism. If it's good in the beginning and everyone's on the same page and everyone has the same expectation, then after the side effect, those conversations will continue to be nurturing and healthy as opposed to adversarial and angry. And you have to watch out for the red flags. So patients and families that have expectations are not realistic, make sure that your guarded optimism isn't misunderstood as a guarantee. Number 4, patient centricity. It takes us not very much time to realize, especially in cancer care, that the patient comes first. The patient comes first above all else, and they go before you. And it's a very unnatural thing to put someone above yourself. But of course, the successful physician will put their patients first. You also have to develop a balance in your life and have equilibrium. You have to have physical, mental, spiritual, family, and intellectual balance. You have to have a life outside of your job, so you can, be able to recharge your battery. And number 6 is you have to investigate. So you really should, after a certain amount of time in practice, actually look at your outcomes. We call them outcome analyses, and I do it all the time. I make a patient have a side effect. I say, okay, this side effect was expected. How many of these out of 100 patients get this side effect? And then how many of these patients out of 100 get this side effect at Memorial Sloan Kettering or at Stanford or at MD Anderson? How do I compare to those big cancer centers in the provocation of these side effects? And that's called an outcome analysis, and that's under investigation. And lastly, renewal. And I'm going to use my last quote, Angel. What is required is a new way of thinking about one's personal energy. That is, work is not merely a domain of energy expenditure, but also of energy renewal. You went into this business, you went into this profession, you went into this career, you went into this healing brotherhood and sisterhood, and it's what we wanted to do. It's what we signed up for. And when we go to work, we should also get renewal from what we're doing. So what we're doing is very special and very sacred. And we're almost there, Angel. We're just going to put a couple of finishing touches. As I said, I was going to go back to Cynthia. So when this happens, there is a spectrum of responses, as I said. So sadly, with Cynthia, one of the things that was a double whammy for her is she went to this top self center. She had her surgery. She woke up with the dead arm, and she woke up with this equipment that she didn't need. And what happened was she got ignored and she got ghosted, which is unacceptable. And instead, what you should do is do whatever you have to do to help the patient get through the process, even if it isn't your fault. It's still your responsibility. And I will share a personal story. I had Cynthia in my office. I called her to come into my office today for me to talk to her health insurance company to try to get special approval for occupational therapy, because she can't move her arm and she needs to learn how to write. She's left-handed. Her left arm is dead. She has to learn how to feed herself. And the insurance company is denying her occupational hazards. I'm sorry, her occupational therapy. Should I be the one calling the insurance company? No, her surgeon should. But we have to do whatever we can, even if we're not the ones that provided that service that caused that side effect. So last point, Angel, to separate or not separate from your question, from your patient, that is the question. So I have two contradictory answers. The first is obvious. I'm a big proponent. I've spent my entire career trying to break down the walls between the physician and their patients and the survivor thriver. So obviously, my answer is separation is not necessary in order to survive a long career and stay out of the loony bin. Our four pillars, Angel, are accessibility, informality, information, and approachability. So you know what my answer is. And I am not ashamed to say that my patients are not just my patients, they're my friends, and I invest 100% of myself into their care. And I've been through each phase of what we spoke about. I have been that intern, and I have been that young doctor, and I have been that middle-aged doctor, and I have been that older doctor who have had to deal with side effects from our hands to our amazing, brave, courageous survivor thrivers. And again, you just have to go through the process, and you don't need to separate yourself. And it even got to the point with me where it did sometimes bring me close to illness, and sometimes brought me close to, despair. But now 35 years later, I'm very balanced. I feel that I have much more maturity, and I have an informed and realistic view of cure and death, and of suffering and pain. And I believe that this will be a road that all of our physicians will end up in, the same road, in the same position that I'm at. But everyone is different. Everyone has their own comfort level with survivor connectivity. And this is not a judgmental podcast. If there is a practitioner who does feel a certain amount of separation is necessary for them to survive their career, then by all means, we support you, we love you, and you are never going to be judged on this podcast. Angel Santana, you always get the last word.
I have a couple questions, actually. Since we have had episodes in the past where we have talked about knowing what to expect from your doctor and from your procedures, I guess the first question I have that I think a listener would want to know is, I know I do, for Cynthia's case, in this situation where things had gone wrong, would this have been one of the possibilities if things were to go south that she's experiencing with it, which is the, pardon the expression, the dead arm? Is that one of the side effects?
That could definitely happen during a surgery that she had. And I'm sure, and again, I trust that it was done properly, that they told her that this possibly can happen. But unfortunately, as I said, there's a continuum or spectrum of how the physician should react to these side effects. And the physicians at that big center didn't behave properly. they behaved terribly. They ignored her. They didn't return her phone calls. They're not fighting for her to get, the post side effect care that she needs to get in the game. And, that's one of the examples of how not to do it, to be in denial and not take responsibility. But at the other end, I don't want that practitioner who might be a very talented practitioner who may have done a lot of great in their career and will continue to do great, or has a great career ahead of them, jump off the top of the building because this happened. Because again, you're going to go through those processes where you're going to feel a lot of self-doubt and a lot of, despair and despondency and things. And I just want to let you know that it's not a problem when these things happen. It's how you respond to it and how you help your survivor thriver through it is what's going to make who you are.
I think, and I appreciate the answer. I think what I really got out of this is listening to the story of how doctors become doctors, right? And listening to all they have to sacrifice and all the things they have to learn and all the things they have to endure. That coincide with a patient that is dealing with an illness or a diagnosis that is to them the unknown. We have to really take a step back, and I'm speaking as the patient since you're the doctor. It's a team effort. It really is. And it's just like any sport analogy you've ever given in the 4 years we've been on this podcast. One hand does wash the other, and we really have to work with each other because, one, as the patient, we don't know all the dialect. We don't know all the language. We don't know the innuendos and all the acronyms. And that's your job to educate us. And that's where I get into communication. But as the patient, we also have to be patient and understand that the job of the doctor is not to put you in a position where it'll make you feel uncomfortable, but yet it's their job to put your best interest at heart. And I think that's something that we really need to dig deeper in the relationship between you and the doctor.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I think this is such an important podcast trio is that it's not really spoken about much. It's sort of unspoken, behind whispered in the hallways of the side effects and, what happens and how they affect the doctor, how they affect the patient, the survivor thriver, how to deal with it from both ends. It is one of those 4-letter words that really is rarely spoken about. And I did want to illuminate, at least put it out there for discussion, that what do they call it? The 800-pound gorilla in the room, right, as far as side effects and things like that. So I wanted to just end on that, Angel, and just tell everybody out there who is suffering from side effects. When we speak about the physician or the provider, suffering from your suffering, in no way are we trying to, again, put ourselves more important than you. Obviously, our survivor thrivers are why we get up in the morning and go to work, why we do what we do is to serve you. And hurting you or causing you pain or giving you symptoms or changing your life in a negative way is not our intention. And it's sad that there is this 8% rule, that it's always going to be there until we become a little bit more sophisticated. But I did want to give you the perspective from both the patient and from the provider. And I hope that it was helpful. And we will end this podcast as we end each podcast. And that's with our CROC blessing. And that blessing is to wish each and every one of you out there, every survivor thriver, a long, healthy, happy, and cancer-free life. God bless you. God be with you. Peace.
We hope you enjoyed the CROC Podcast. And a lot of people have been writing us and asking us, what happens after the show goes off the air? Well, here's an inside clip right after we went off the air. Not too bad. I thought I would do a little something different that way.
That was beautiful, baby.
Yeah. The CROC Podcast, Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer, returns on March 30th. Don't forget, we are available every other weekend, but most importantly, we are here for you. We are challenging you, the patient or the doctor, to come out and join us. If you have a story, if you have something you'd like to share, we have an open door policy and we expect to hear from you because this is a show, it's for you. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Hey, CROC Nation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast to your friends. Visit our website, crocvip.com. We would love to hear your feedback.